Yay, I've remembered to hit the record button. This is good for me. Anyway, good evening, everybody. First, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we live and bird on the unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq. We give thanks for this. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. For those of you who don't know, I'm Tony Millard. I'm the president of the Nova Scotia Bird Society. I'd just like to apologise for my legendary computer skills. I'll do my best not to screw it up tonight, but I have before. Okay, announcements. We are pleased to again, as a society, support the Butterfly Way project, which is organised by Charlene Meisner. This year it has expanded and is now doing a large range of native plant seeds as well as the milkweed for the monarch butterflies. These native plants and seeds, they encourage bugs and that encourages birds. These seeds are sent out free of charge, and you can Google or Facebook search the Butterfly Way project and you can get details, and Charlene will send seeds out to you for no cost. I'd also encourage you to check out the events section on the Facebook page and the website for upcoming meetings for the spring and summer area or period. And also, please remember there are 2 weeks remaining for applications for this year's Dr. Ian McLaren Scholarship. Again, for full details, it's on our social media and on the website for applying for the scholarship grant. We are working on this year's field trips and various meetings throughout the year, so keep checking the events section. Big announcement. This year's annual out-of-town meeting is going to be based in, drumroll, Annapolis Royal. It's accessible for a lot of the province. I'm afraid not that accessible for folks up Cape Breton Way, but it's pretty central for a lot of people. Full details will be finalised in the next few months, but there's some great trails around Annapolis that are completely accessible for all. Some great birding in the area, and it's going to be, I'm really looking forward to it. I really am. It's going to be a great weekend. Anyway, on to the main event of the evening. Tonight, Biz Bell from Wildlife Management International will be presenting a process of restoring islands for seabirds, starting with the understanding the impacts faced by seabirds on these islands, assessing the feasibility of a restoration project, implementation of management actions, specifically eradication of invasive species, and seabird monitoring, and assessing the long-term results of this type of project. Biz will be using a number of get my brain in gear. We'll use a number of examples of islands where she's directed restoration projects to protect and enhance seabirds, such as the Atlantic puffins and Mount Shearwaters, and to answer questions why, where, how, and what happens during this time. Biz is a seabird and island restoration specialist, working on a wide range of ecological and conservation projects throughout New Zealand and around the world. As Managing Director of WMIL, Biz directs a team of passionate ecologists, completing a variety of seabird and shorebird conservation projects for the government and for non-government agencies across New Zealand, and island restoration projects for conservation agencies and governments around the world. So basically, over to you, Biz, and I've now got to share the screen. And I've got to remember where the button for that is as well. Yeah, I know. I should know. I know about cars. I know about birds and building things. Here comes my IT department. Share there.
Now share at bottom.
Okay, Biz, you should be in.
No, so you've shared your screen. I need you to give me.
I'm allowing you now.
Okay, perfect.
It's because this is bouncing off the satellite and down to the Earth station and everywhere else.
Excellent.
Hopefully you have control.
Yeah. Hopefully people can see this. Can
Just
everybody
see the
see
word
that
Zoom
now?
right now.
Nope.
Not yet. I
Hang
think
on.
stop sharing. Tony should.
I can see it.
Can everybody else see this now?
I can see it.
Yes.
I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
I must be the
Great.
only one who can't because I just have share on Zoom on the screen.
Bigger turnout too, look at it.
Yeah. Everyone needs to mute.
Yeah, I did.
I think it was 12 for the.
Is everybody seeing it?
Is it a presentation? Because I'm only seeing a website with Zoom on it. I think that Tony is still sharing his screen.
Yeah, I think Tony, well, yeah.
I can see it. I can see the first
Right.
page of business presentation.
Oh, good.
Oh, interesting. I can't.
I'm
I
trying
wonder.
to get the presentation up.
Should be made.
At the top of the screen, there should be 2 tabs. Just click on Biz's, because you can also click on Tony's and just see the NSBS one.
Ah, very interesting. I hadn't run into that before.
Okay, you should be host now, Biz, in theory, once Zoom has sorted itself out and the little circle has finished
So now
spinning.
if you stop share. And now this can.
You have it.
Excellent. Has everybody got it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, we will start then. So thanks very much for the invitation to present on some of my work that I've been doing for the last sort of scary 30 years. And it's a real pleasure to be here and share these stories. So as said, I'm a seabird ecologist and an island restoration specialist. I've directed over 30 eradications worldwide, including several on islands with communities. And I do a lot of work in New Zealand. Most of our seabird work is based in New Zealand, but we also do a little bit of advice and translocation work as part of these restoration projects we do internationally. And so we're going to sort of talk about restoration and the who, how, when, why, what, and things. And so who does these? Well, I direct these a lot, of course, all over the world, but it's a whole group of people. So lots of funders, lots of agencies, conservation, government groups, community groups, all sorts of people who do it. And so when I go through this talk and I talk about we've done this, it's actually all of these people. And we generally also have not only staff helping with us do this, but we also have a hell of a lot of volunteers who work on these projects. And basically, you know, all the hard work that they do, that the success of these projects is a real credit to them. You know, they really put themselves out there and work for months on islands often. So yeah, they work very hard in difficult conditions, because eradications also, particularly rat eradications, a winter exercise. So you can imagine working on some of these islands in winter takes a little bit of effort. So why do we do these projects? Well, they're carried out for a number of reasons, but primarily for the protection and enhancement of native species, particularly seabirds, but also in some situations reptiles, so snakes and lizards, all of those critically endangered or threatened native species and the habitats they live in. And why islands? Well, islands are critical biodiversity hotspots and home to a massive amount of rare and unique species. Islands only make up about 5% of the world's land mass, but they hold about 20% of the species that live there. So plants, birds, reptiles. So really critical spots. And that isolation has led to some really impressive, unique species being developed on those islands. Islands are sentinels for sea level and climate change. They're more at risk from these impacts. And so islands can be used as conservation laboratories to understand the impacts and how to treat those things that are happening in climate change and sea level. They're critical rest stops and nesting habitat for birds and also marine animals like turtles. So they're vital for those species, because if we didn't have those places, we wouldn't have places for birds to nest. And seabirds support those islands by providing key nutrients from the sea onto land through the guano. And they also help create healthy coastal marine environments around islands as the runoff of nutrients goes into the sea. Of course, islands support people. There's over 600 million people who live on islands around the world. And so, you know, they're pretty impressive spots to be. And of course, islands support those key coral reef ecosystems. And that's all about enabling other marine species to survive around those islands. So they're critically important spots and we need to protect them. And so what's the issue with islands? Well, it's a whole range of invasive species, mostly mammals, and I am going to be a bit biased towards rats because a lot of our work has been on rat eradications. But of course, there's also problem birds, problem invertebrates, and problem plants and reptiles. So of course, we've got this massive suite of invasive species, and many of these are listed as the top 100 invasive species of the world, causing massive impacts to the native species that live on islands through direct predation, competition for food and space, and spreading disease and all sorts of other things. So these are the species we want to control or remove from the islands so that we can restore them for the seabirds and other things that live there. So how do we restore islands? Well, basically, one step is these island restoration projects or eradication of these invasive species. And there has been a massive number so far. There's over 1,550 eradications occurred around the world on nearly 1,000 islands. Rats have been targeted on over 800 operations across 40 countries. But there's also been numerous goat and feral cat and rat and mice and rabbit eradications as well. The majority of these eradications, nearly 25%, have occurred in New Zealand. But the world is catching up and that technology is spreading. Interestingly, eradication history, so although New Zealand is sort of leading the world in eradication, the first eradication actually happened in an island off France, and then on Maria Island in New Zealand, and then in Cardigan Island in Wales, all between 1950 and 1968. The interesting thing about those first 3 island eradications, which were all for rats, were all accidental. So the seabird scientists who were monitoring the seabird populations on those islands at the time, at the end of their breeding seasons, they decided they were going to throw some rodenticide around to drop the rat numbers to protect the seabirds and the habitat over winter. And then when they came back the following season, they suddenly realised that there were no rats left on the island. So New Zealanders, being New Zealanders, decided, well, if we could do it by accident, we must be able to do it intentionally. So in 1981, New Zealand decided to try an intentional rat eradication by removing rats from a small group of islands called the Noises off Auckland, and was successful in that. And so that successful eradication led to more ground-based rat eradications being done in New Zealand on small and medium islands in the late 80s and early 90s, basically proving that eradications could be done. And of course, once those ground-based eradications had been working and had been going very well, it developed rapid advancements in eradication technology, including eradications by the air. And now, of course, since then, a lot more eradications have occurred, and on larger and larger islands, including islands up to 36,000 hectares. So some pretty significant projects are ongoing and continue to happen. But of course, not all eradications can be done from the air. There's a number of legal restrictions, community preferences, and the presence of seriously at-risk non-target species. So those ground-based bait station operations are still important and have occurred on quite large islands around the world. 1,300 hectares in Scotland called the Isle of Canna, and even the 3,100 hectare Langara Island or Kisgawa, Gaiwa in British Columbia. So some big islands can be done by hand on the ground. And all of these island eradications also led to the development of mainland eradication situations where predator-proof fence technology was developed. And this was because in several locations we have special species and special habitats on your mainland that we want to protect. But of course you can't stop things going in and out. So these fences have been developed to prevent predators going in, digging under, jumping over. And although developed in New Zealand in the late 90s, these are now found in a number of locations around the world, including Hawaii, the Azores, and in Anguilla in the Caribbean. So you can protect your habitats and native species on the mainland as well. And of course, most eradications have been done on uninhabited islands. And generally that's the easiest because the presence of people, of course, complicate things. But eradications are now moving on to islands with people. We started one on Canna, which had 12 resident families, to St Agnes and Goo, which had 85 residents. And of course, most recently, the Lord Howe eradication in Australia, which has 350 residents. So although the presence of people can complicate things, it is still possible to restore those islands when people are present. And of course, all of these eradications over the last 50 years or so have, of course, helped develop best practice. So that there are international regulations about how to do eradications and restoration projects. And this has started from New Zealand into the Pacific and now to the UK and the US. But of course, when you're starting to think about your restoration project, you have to go through all the steps of understanding how your project's going to work and where you're doing it. So when you get to your island that you're thinking of restoring, you have to look at it. Is it small? Is it only one island? Does it have cliffs? What's the vegetation cover like? Is there a community present? What's the archaeology? And so you have to address all of those things and understand what your island is going to be like to see what techniques you're going to have to put in place. And then, of course, back to your target species. What is that invasive species that you want to remove? Because depending if you have only one or multiple species is going to change the techniques and the methods you're going to use. Even the presence of the different types of rat species will change what your operation is like, because brown rats like water, open spaces and people, whereas ship rats like climbing trees and can be targeted, sometimes will only live in trees. So you have to have a three-dimensional baiting arrangement. So it's really important to understand which species you have on your island that you're trying to remove. And then, what are the species you're trying to protect? And what are the non-target species on your island that you're trying to make sure don't get any risk from your restoration project you're doing? And this can range from, Mr. and Mrs. Smith's pet cat or pet dog, the livestock, special species on the island, so sometimes like sea eagles, or even some of the seabirds that are present and some of the land birds, and even some of the other mammals that are present. Some islands, rabbits aren't a pest, but they don't want to be impacted by an eradication of rats on the island. Some islands have small shrews or wood mice. And so we're trying to think of ways that we can reduce or remove the risk to these species while your restoration project is ongoing. And then depending on what species you're targeting, what method are you actually going to use? If it's rats, are you going to do a ground-based bait station operation or a helicopter operation? Are you going to use traps? Are you going to plan broadcast things? If you're targeting goats and pigs, are you going to be using dogs to hunt or shooting? So there's a whole range of techniques that you must weigh up the pros and cons of each one and to see how and when things are going to work. If you are focusing on rats and you're doing a ground-based operation, what sort of bait station do you use? The cheapest and easiest design is the short drainage pipe, sort of that right-hand image there. But of course, there are hundreds of other designs you can use, including commercial stations, which are readily available. And of course, the best thing to do is trial all these types before you do an eradication to see how rats behave around them. Because of course, some rats don't like going into certain things. And often you have to adapt or have multiple designs to make sure you can effectively target your animal. And then once you've made all these decisions and you've done your feasibility assessment, before you start your eradication, we do what's called a readiness check. And this is often because when you do your feasibility study, it can be several years before you actually implement your eradication project because you're waiting for funding or special permissions. And situations can change between your two timeframes. And one example for us was when we did an eradication in the Shants in Scotland. We did the feasibility assessment sort of 2 years before the eradication got funded. So we went back to the island to make sure nothing had changed, and something rather significant had. So 2 sea eagles had moved in. So these are critically endangered eagles, and we didn't want to impact on those. So when we talked to the Sea Eagle Restoration Group, we had to create a giant bird feeding table to provide alternative food for the sea eagles so that they wouldn't try and eat dead or dying rats. Interestingly, of course, the sea eagles didn't go anywhere near the table. They, of course, feed on fish, which we tried to explain wouldn't be an impact on the rats. And we found that even the crows and gulls didn't go anywhere near the giant feeding table. The other thing, of course, is to establish a project partnership. And that's making sure we have everybody involved, the stakeholder groups, the community groups, and come together to get a vision for their island. And so it's working on how they want to see their island afterwards, why they're trying to do this work and things. And it can be a formal statement of, you know, removing all the brown rats from St Agnes and Goo and minimising all these, or it could be something as simple as restoring our island birdsong together, something that means something to the community, why they're doing this and how they want to see it. Part of it is also to engage with the local communities to get them to help produce aspects for the project, so that, see the logo in the middle there, the Seabird, Isles of Scilly Seabird Recovery Project, that was designed by the school kids on the island because they wanted to see it all together. They have a big central lighthouse that is the whole hub of their island. They're wanting their Manx shearwaters back, and they're also wanting it to be from the children all the way through to adults. So they developed this logo, and that was the project logo for the whole project and ongoing into the future, where the next series of islands is about to be done on that group of islands. And so it's just getting everybody on board and being part of the project from the very beginning. And then, of course, really important on islands that have communities is talking with everyone. We want to identify all those stakeholders. So not only just the people that live there, but all of the business owners, the farmers, the shopkeepers, the church, everything, to make sure that we identify those people, understand their concerns, talk them through the mitigation about all of their concerns, how we're going to make sure things don't impact them and their lifestyles, what we can do to help them, how they can help us on the project. We had a great number of farmers who helped us drive equipment and tools around with their tractors, which is really appreciated when you consider how heavy some of this equipment is. And the involvement of communities in particular is absolutely critical. The communication is vital. We need to be able to tell them everything. It needs to be completely transparent so they know what's going on. And that participation and support from the community is absolutely vital for the success of the project. And also for the long-term legacy of the project once those invasive species are removed and into the future to make sure they don't come back to islands. So we have had some great support from communities, from everybody from age 0 all the way to age 99 and 100, part of the project and being involved. Several of these pictures you can see wearing bright orange hats. So one of the consultation processes was we have several elderly people at this island and they wanted to be part of the project, and we were going into a lot of people's private homes or gardens and they wanted to be able to see us and identify us very easily. So we got bright orange hats and we were in the end called the Flaming Ratters because they kept seeing us go in and out of gardens all the time. But the oldest woman on the island, who was 98 at the time of this eradication, said she absolutely loved these hats because she could see us regardless of her eyesight failing, and she could see these little orange hats walking around her garden and knew that it was us coming to target the rats in her property. So she was really pleased to be included in this whole eradication. And then, of course, once you've decided on your tools, you actually have to make all your bait stations and your monitoring tools. You have to gather all your equipment together, gather your team, and then also get your personnel to the island. Now, several of the islands we've worked on have communities and, of course, have accommodation available, and we can rent some holiday houses and things. Other islands, of course, have very little infrastructure. And, of course, we fly helicopters in to try and bring in extra gear and also extra cabins so that we can live in winter not in a tent, because as you can imagine, a tent is not so much fun in a Scottish winter. I know you guys are all in -4 at the moment, but some of the serious summer winter gales in Scotland are also pretty unpleasant. And then particularly for rat eradications, you then, and particularly for ground-based operations, you then have to put your grid in place. And this is a lot of hard work and can involve some specialist teams doing rope access work going up and down cliffs. There's a lot of competition between team members about how many bait stations they can get on the back of backpacks and then get out how many they can do in a day. So it's good fun, it's hard work, and there's some significant islands and landscapes to deal with. So that central picture of me pointing my arms aimlessly there is to talk through about how we work through a massive boulder field where normally shags and puffins and guillemots and razorbills are nesting. They're not there present in winter, and how to get across that safely, but make sure that the grid is maintained in the right spacings. So lots of discussions, lots of pointing and waving arms, and then a lot of hard work clambering over boulders. And then you get these sorts of grids established and maps produced, because every bait station is mapped using GPS and linked to a GIS database. And most of our work now is even more technology based, because we do all this on apps. And so we put them in position, put them on an app, and it all gets mapped automatically. And so this is the Isle of Canna in Scotland, made up of 2 islands, the main Canna and the little island called Sanday. And this is where every bait station on those islands were. So there was just under 7,000 bait stations across this island, every 50 metres around the coast and every 90 metres on the top 2 plateaus. And then these detailed maps and apps can give the team specific information to help them on the ground through those operations. So you can have these maps come up on your phone or in your app, and it can give you both the numbers of the bait stations, the colour of the bait station telling you which area they were. So the blue ones are buffer zones before you hit the cliffs. The red arrows, double-ended arrows, show the safe ways up and down the cliffs. And the pink's hashed area in the middle is what is a special archaeological site which is called the nunnery, which is that little central picture. And so this is a really important old, very, very old nunnery. And the archaeologists asked us not to put bait stations inside that area because they weren't sure how many important artifacts were going to be on the inside. But luckily for us, one side to the other side of the nunnery measured exactly 50 metres, which meant we could exclude that area, but remain being able to monitor it inside without doing any archaeological impact, which was great. And these maps and these apps help us streamline the information. We can highlight all those sensitive areas. We can highlight any problems. People can report a missing bait station instantly. And those apps can download that information directly into the main database and the main maps and can give us real-time information about where those rats are present, where the hotspots are, and how the bait take is happening. Of course, so part of it is doing bait take, and for a rat eradication, you've got to put the rodenticide out into the bait stations. So you carry a lot of equipment with you, your maps in the olden days, or now your app on your phone, your gloves to handle the rodenticide, some extra bait station lids and covers to make sure that just in case anything's disappeared, and then your bucket of bait. And so we train up all our volunteers or our staff, teach them how to do this, and then they go out into the field and put the bait out to target rats. And then, of course, it's up to the rats. We want them to eat the bait and take it away to their burrows, feed it to their wives and children, and then slowly get eradicated. And that intimate knowledge of where the bait stations are and the island itself makes it much easier to be able to monitor that rat take and the bait take across the island. And this is the data that can come out of it. So it can lead to very detailed heat maps about what bait take has happened and where. So this bait take shows all the bait take from red being lots and lots of bait to blue and white being very low take. And all of those red areas are some of the main seabird colonies and also some of the central farmland or places where stock were being fed. And that's pretty much standard practice, standard patterns in a rat eradication, because rats love seabird colonies and they love foraging where farms are and where stock food is. But the great thing about these maps is you can instantly tell where your high risk areas are going to be and where the sites for possible incursion after the rats are gone and ships come in or yachts come in may occur. So you can then have more biosecurity focus on those areas. And the other good thing about it is with the GIS technology and the apps put together, you can monitor the decline in rat numbers throughout the operation and pinpoint any hotspots. So this little video shows how much rat take there was in each round as we went. And as rat numbers decline, they actually roam around a lot. And this is the Chantiles in Scotland. Started out with a lot of take, mostly around the coast. Then it reduces down, numbers jump around a little bit, and then the last rat sign on Mary Island. And then for the remaining bait rounds, there was another 10 bait rounds after bait round 10, no take at all. And so this just shows how you can start off with a really high, dense rat population and watch it go down to zero. And of course, we need to prove that they're at zero. So the key thing is we have to then do a lot of monitoring through the end of the project. And that's the benefit about a ground-based operation, because you have a lot of people already checking bait stations and they can now focus on checking all the monitoring tools. And monitoring tools can be anything from lots of different flavoured wax blocks, because rats like chewing wax blocks. There's chew cards, there's trail cameras, there's tracking tunnels. There's now all the fancy thermal cameras and drones that we use a lot of. And this is to prove, to be really confident that we have no rats left. And this is the sort of sign you can see, little teeth marks on chew cards, little teeth marks on the wax blocks, and footprints through the tracking tunnels. And what we're trying to do with this high level of monitoring across the island is to detect any survivors and then be able to adapt the operation to target those fussy last rats that we have left. Because before the eradication team leave the island, we want to be 99.9% confident that there are no more rats left. And then the intensive monitoring happens, long-term monitoring happens over the next 2 years before the island can be declared rat-free. And so what happens when the island is declared rat-free? Biosecurity. And this is forever. So once you have no invasive species left, you want to make sure they never get back to your island. And so you have to have a little bit of knowledge about the risk and the pathways and other ways to stop your rats getting there. And so we want to understand, say, particularly for rats, can they swim from a neighbouring island? How many boats visit the island? Is somebody going to bring camping gear that they've left in their garage for years and has got a nesting family of rats in the bottom of it? So when they open it up on the island, rats and their rat family are going to run away. So there's a lot of comprehensive biosecurity planning put together during the eradication and implemented before the team leave, including biosecurity stations, trap boxes, monitoring points, and these are regularly monitored by your biosecurity team, or in the case of an island with a community, by your community champions who continue doing biosecurity checks monthly on into the future. And of course, because on islands with community, there's a higher risk. So it's really vital that that community is on board and really concentrating on how they and their visitors can prevent rats in particular getting back to an island. Most of the other invasives, although mustelids can swim quite well, so things like cats and rabbits and goats would all have to be accidentally delivered or purposely delivered back to an island generally. But rats and mice are the small things that can accidentally get there by themselves by stowing away on boats or in equipment. So those are the most difficult ones to monitor for and detect. So there's lots of different tools and other options. And of course, there is also the use of the conservation dog. So where they're biosecurity dogs trained to sniff out rodents or stoats or cats or rabbits, depending on the species they've been trained on, and they can come and do surveys on the islands to see if they can detect any rat sign or anything else that they're supposed to be detecting. But then, of course, there's the exciting things, what happens. So the difficult things is getting rid of the invasive species, but then you have some pretty amazing stories about why you've done them. So Lundy Island is one of the first eradications I directed. So it's in the UK. It's nearly 500 hectares. It is inhabited. It's got several staff members who live there maintaining the island for tourists. This island gets about 20,000 tourists a year. There's a lot of holiday rental properties that they can rent and see and things. And the operation happened in between 2002 and 2004, and it was declared rat-free 2 years later in 2006. We were targeting 2 species of rat, so the Norway rat or the brown rat and the ship rat or the black rat, depending on which country you're on. It was a ground-based bait station operation, and it was to try and restore the island for Manx shearwaters and Atlantic puffins. And so what happened? So we did a lot of, RSPB did a lot of outcome monitoring. So before the eradication started, there were 600 Manx shearwaters on the island in these locations marked in the blue circles. And then just after the eradication finished, the numbers had increased to 1,100 and a few more had spread around from where they were. And then in 2013, there were 3,500 breeding pairs across the island and massive increase in scope. But as of 2 years ago, there are now 25,000 pairs of Manx shearwaters on Lundy. And I was always asked when I would say that the eradication on Lundy was successful, and I told the warden at the time that when the visitors who stayed overnight in the lighthouse accommodation complained that they were being kept up at night by Manx shearwaters, then the project would be a success. Well, 20 years to the day, the ranger at the time was having a beer with me, and he said, "Oh, I have to tell you this, Biz. I got a complaint last night about Manx shearwaters keeping the lighthouse stayers up." And I said, "That's brilliant, absolutely brilliant." And I said, "And I hope you told them to go out and enjoy the birds, and that they're here and more important than the visitor." So yeah, and I mean, the great thing is the other species as well have recovered. So the puffins, they were down to 3 known pairs at the time of the eradication, and we've now got over 1,300 pairs, which is absolutely exciting, particularly as Lundy is the Norse word for puffin. So it's really nice that this bird is back and increasing dramatically. And the other exciting thing was the storm petrel was not recorded on Lundy prior to the eradication, and within a few years after the eradication it was recorded for the first time, and they've now got 300 pairs. So that's pretty exciting too. And Ramsay Island, which was one of the very first eradications Wildlife Management did, and it's where we developed a lot of the ground-based techniques that are now being used across the UK, was also to protect the Manx shearwater. And that was declared rat-free in 2002, and it was only a one species, the brown rat. And again, the Manx shearwaters have just increased dramatically and spread in range since the rats have been eradicated. So now they're pretty much all right round the coast of the island. And yeah, the coastal slopes are just covered in Manx shearwaters. But the interesting thing about these Manx shearwaters here is they're very difficult to study because the burrows are really hard to get into, or in quite dangerous coastal cliff areas. So in 2013 and 2015, using a design that we use in New Zealand for artificial burrows, RSPB and the local wildlife trust put in a whole range of study burrows for Manx shearwaters. And for the first time in 2015, some birds started prospecting, and a year later they started nesting. And in 2018, there were 7 pairs nesting in there successfully, and since then the numbers have continued to increase. But the great thing about these artificial burrows is they're being used to do both population productivity and monitoring, but also to do some of those amazing tracking and breeding biology studies to understand where these birds go and what other countries and coastal areas and marine areas they inhabit, and where we have to protect them in other locations as well. So not only is the eradication helped them on their own island, but it's also given us scope to be able to do some really important seabird monitoring that would have been impossible from this island otherwise. And so these are some pretty exciting results that they've been doing, and it just that scope that you can have after doing eradications. And then going from the cold UK to the very warm Caribbean, this is just to show you a completely different type of rat and goat eradication. So we had to catch the goats by hand and take them off the island because they were a historic breed and they were very robust. They drank a lot of seawater, they survived on basically nothing, and the locals wanted to maintain the breed and then crossbreed them with domestic goats back on the main Antigua. This is a little island. As you can see, it's a pretty dramatic looking island, about 80 hectares. It's a pile of rocks on top of a rock, and it's falling into the sea because, of course, the combination of rats and goats has pretty much wiped out all vegetation. It's uninhabited. It was mined for guano and used for making fertilizer and then bombs in the war. And there is a number of important seabirds on the island, magnificent frigate-bird, a lot of brown and masked boobies, a lot of terns and things, but some really critically endangered endemic ground lizards and tree lizards there. So this was a very interesting island. We had a range of ground and aerial-based techniques. We had ground-based bait stations on the top, what we call the flat area of the island. We had climbers climbing on some of those extreme cliffs, and on the areas that were too dangerous for both people on foot or on the ropes, we did hand broadcasting from the helicopter. So that's me attached by harness, standing out on the skids, throwing bait out of a helicopter. So some pretty interesting, fun techniques for that operation. The goats actually went back to the main island inside that helicopter. We put pool noodles on their horns so that they wouldn't damage the helicopter, and blindfolded them, put them inside. We have to put them inside a helicopter. They can't be slung off the island because goats' chests crush and they will die accidentally if you do them that way. So they had to sit inside a helicopter. And I'm not sure Robert De Niro, who used the helicopter the day after, appreciated the smell of the goats in his very fancy helicopter tour ride around Antigua. But that's all part of a conservation project. But the interesting thing is, of course, so this is what the island looked like when we were doing the eradication. So pretty barren, a few trees, a little bit of grass. So, you know, goats absolutely destroy in island environments. They pretty much browse everything to the ground, and then seedlings are eaten by the rats as well. So as you can see, it was very barren. But within 2 years of the eradication, both the goats and the rats removed, this is what it looked like. Absolutely incredibly different. I went back 12 months later to do the final check for the rats, and where there were no trees, there were suddenly trees taller than me. So in a tropical environment, it just shows you how crazy it is. So from complete moonscape to pretty lush green vegetation. And the crazy thing was as well is the ground lizards were very low numbers when we were there, and they increased by 1,000%. So the numbers are everywhere, the lizards are everywhere, and the birds are just, productivity has gone, increased in a massive amount. And of course, then it's all about getting that reporting out there, writing some scientific papers, doing lots of advocacy, talking to people like yourselves, putting it in the media and telling the story about how you can restore islands. It takes a lot of work, costs a lot of money, but the results are mind-blowing in some situations. And yeah, it can just be an absolute game changer to those species that we're trying to protect and trying to thrive. So yeah, really critically important work to do. And what's next? Well, anything goes really, and it's trying to tell everybody, don't be afraid to have aspirational goals. Aotearoa New Zealand has a vision for predator-free 2050. We're targeting possums, rats and mustelids across our entire country, with communities leading the way throughout their neighbourhoods. So that map of New Zealand there, all of those red areas are community groups doing control and eradication projects on their own. Some of the blue areas are some of the larger scale controls and things, and we're connecting up the country with networks before. So, you know, here comes New Zealand, and I think the rest of the world can catch up. And so absolutely anything is possible, and who knows where we can go from here. Technology is advancing at a rapid rate, and yeah, the next tool could be just around the corner that could clear some invasive species from huge land masses. So that's really, really exciting. So yeah, that's the story of island restoration and some of the results. So more than happy to take any questions and comments and anything else.
Some stuff in the chat if you want to have a look in there, Biz.
Yep, hang on. Let me
I
just
daren't
find
click it in case I lose something.
it. I know, it's like, hang on, oh my, let me just try and
The
escape.
updated zoom looks quite different in some areas to how it used to be.
I'll stop sharing, and maybe that will help me find the chat. There we go.
Yeah, let's have a look. Basically, folks, impressed by the difference in that 2 years on that Caribbean island. I mean,
Oh.
my God, what a amazing before and after shot.
Yes, that's right. So the question about how long between rounds of baiting, it depended on the island, but so the chance where that video was happening, they were anywhere between 4 and 7 days. So yeah. The question about the dead rats, most of the dead rats die underground. They die in their burrows, and so we don't get a lot of rats to pick up off the surface. We do collect dead carcasses and dispose of those correctly. And in most eradications, we've had less than a dozen on the surface. So, yeah. So,
oh, sorry.
No, I was just trying to see the number of goats that we removed from Redonda was 60. So that just shows, I mean, that's a very, very small island. And of course, the goats are restricted to the best habitat, although they were going up and down some very scary cliffs and things. So, yeah. And the goats we didn't kill, the goats got transferred to the mainland. So they're still alive in Antigua. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we always have the concern with bait stations, at least I certainly do, for secondary kill, for scavengers, basically. So how do you minimize the local owl taking a poison rat and the owl dying as well?
Yeah, so a lot of it comes down to the type of rodenticide you choose as well. So there are a number of rodenticides that reduce the risk to owls and raptors, so the tools that we're using for eradication, particularly in New Zealand and in some locations, we only use as a tool on an island, so it cannot be used as a controlled tool on a mainland situation, that sort of thing. You have a look at where your raptors are, the population level, that sort of thing, to understand how they behave, that sort of thing. Again, it's collecting the carcasses as much as you can. Of course, raptors are, and owls in particular, are much better at finding a carcass than we are, but often we can reduce that risk by doing that. But the key thing is to try and limit the operation to when either they're not present or not active, or to use a toxin that is going to be low risk to the raptor.
Cool. Open to the floor. What questions have folks got?
So there are new developments of species specific toxins as well underway in New Zealand. Part of our predator-free project, vision is to develop new tools, and one is to develop something that is only going to be species specific, particularly for rats and mice. So yeah, so hopefully then that risk to birds, and any type of bird, but in particular those raptors, will be reduced. So very much watch this space. There is some really exciting stuff coming on. So yeah, so there is a list of islands that have been cleared. So there's a website called the Database for Island Invasive Eradications. I think it's invasive species eradications on islands. So DIISE.com, I think. And that's a great website if you want to look at every eradication that's ever happened around the world. And our brand new website, which hopefully is going to be launched on Monday, will have a fair bit of information from the ones that we've done ourselves. And in a few more months when we develop, we're actually also going to add an interactive map for our website that shows the work we've done around the world, so that people can specifically see some of the projects that we work on. So for resistance from locals, Lundy Island actually had some significant resistance because there was a group of people who wanted the black rat not impacted on. They felt that they were rare, and so there was quite a lot of discussion about that. They believed they were vegetarians, And so we had to do a whole heap of proof that they weren't vegetarians and that they were eating seabirds. And unfortunately, we just had to agree to disagree there because they still didn't believe us, regardless of the evidence we provided. Most of the rest of the discussion is about mitigation or concerns they have. And once people have those concerns discussed and feel happy about the answers, then they're usually much more supportive. It's really critical to just give people the chance to voice their concerns and be listened to.
I'm just scrolling down the.
So the goats weren't sedated. We actually just tied their legs together, and 2 or 3 of them. Well, usually 2 in a helicopter, but if we had small goats, we had quite a few juvenile goats, then they could go off. We had a couple of baby goats and the mother go off together, those sorts of things. So yeah, some kids and mums go off, but generally 2. I think the most we had in one of the helicopters was 3, and that was 1 big male and 2 smaller females. So yeah. Unfortunately, we couldn't shepherd them off the island because the only way down is a very, very steep gully, and incredibly way too dangerous to send the animals down that. And so it was much safer in the end to put them on the helicopter. So
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. That's really neat. You managed to get them off, and the locals needed them.
yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, it was absolutely crazy.
Looks like the goats owe you some roller coaster tickets.
I know. best 25-minute flight back to the Antigua ever for free. So
Nice.
yeah.
Folks, there must be more questions than this.
So that probably is an artifact. I mean, that's the raw data. So I haven't seen the latest. So a rough cost is very difficult to give you because eradications do vary, and it also depends on your island type and the technical challenges you have. So if you need rope access people, it's more expensive. If you have a helicopter, of course, it's more expensive. If you've got boat access or you've got to bring in temporary accommodation. So it does depend, but some eradications have cost as little as well. I mean, the Lundy eradication originally was, I think, 75,000, but of course used all volunteer labour and things, £75,000. One of the most recent eradications I'm doing is £5 million operating time costs, and that's eradicating 2 species, 1 ferrets and rats. But it's on a very large island with significant rope access requirements and boat access requirements and things. So yeah, if you look at some of the stoat eradication that's going in Orkney at the moment, that's nearly £12 million. And yeah, so it can depend on the project and things. So part of your feasibility assessment is to give a very good budget and outline the costs and things. And also it depends on who you talk to, whether you're wanting just the eradication costs themselves or you're also wanting the preparation and monitoring costs as well included. So I prefer giving the full costs so that people actually realise that the monitoring of your key species like your birds and your mammals that are left on the island is just as important as actually getting rid of them, because we need to be able to prove that these projects are good. And so we need to be able to monitor everything, good and bad impacts. So yeah, costs can judge that.
One question's come up as a direct message, which possibly only comes through to me. Wondering what the current stoat population of New Zealand is compared to 2015.
I don't know. We have killed a lot of stoats. Yeah, and there are several eradications ongoing on some of the offshore islands, which will remove them completely and things. But stoats are also incredibly difficult to get rid of on the mainland situation, and they behave quite weirdly around stations and things. So there's a lot of new development about different tools to target stoats more effectively across a wide landscape. So yeah.
Why so difficult to eradicate stoats?
Because because they avoid stations quite well. So they avoid traps, they walk past devices. Yeah, it's a real behavior thing. They can, you know, so a certain percentage of them can be easy to trap. You know, that's the same with any population. So the more naive animals, you know, can be easy to trap, and then you get the wily smart ones who, yeah, that we don't
We
want to
call
share
it
their
trap shy.
Yes, we definitely have some trap shy. We definitely have, you know, and it's all about having the best tools working to the highest standard so that we don't have anybody, you know, any animal caught in escape and things like that who'll never go into stations before. So there's lots of job and volunteer opportunities in this line of work. That's one of the questions there. There's basically, it depends on where, if you're happy to travel, there's lots of, in New Zealand in particular, there's a couple of websites, conservationjobs.co.nz is one to look at for conservation opportunities. There's a lot of work in the UK in this field now. There's a lot more projects doing that sort of thing. Some of the list servers, you know, for invasive species projects advertise a lot of the volunteer opportunities and things. In fact, there's just one been advertised for the Seychelles for an 8-month position for a volunteer who wants to do rats and feral cats. So yeah, so there is definitely lots of opportunities and things. And if anybody is interested, we quite happily take people's CVs and add them to our files and send them out lists of opportunities when they come up. So if anybody is interested, yeah, don't hesitate to flick me an email.
-4 out there, snow tonight, and the Seychelles.
Yeah.
Really difficult sell.
Yeah.
There we go.
I saw that there's a dot by Nova Scotia, and I wondered what island that was. If you,
I can't remember off. I knew I should have looked that one up because I was thinking somebody's smart, quick eyes is going to notice that one. Honestly, go onto the invasive species website, the DISE website, and that will tell you where they are. So I'm not going to guarantee my accuracy on all of those dots, you know, but yeah, that'll be able to tell you where those eradications are and the closest ones to you guys. So yeah, and it also may not be rats; it may be something else. That's the other thing, because that is the mixture of all species, invasive species eradications. So yeah.
Sarah, I'm guessing that might be Kent Island with the snowshoe hare off of New Brunswick, I guess.
Yeah, I checked. It was Hay and Kent Island. They have found it.
I kind of had another question for you. Have you ever run into kind of an impossible scenario or I don't know. I was just curious about that.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, not every island is feasible at the moment, and that's either due to technology or legislation impacts and things like that. Some of the islands of the scale and that sort of thing, particularly in countries, so like the UK, you cannot do aerial-based operations. It has to all be ground-based, and it has to be inside bait stations. So that sort of puts a limit on the island size. I mean, technically, you can do an island of any size, but you then need hundreds of thousands of people to do the groundwork, and of course that then puts the cost out astronomical. So some of those become unfeasible. So that's the really key thing about an eradication process. You must do a feasibility first. You cannot assume that it's going to work. And so and it's really important to be brave enough to say, actually, this isn't feasible, that sort of thing. So I mean, we've just done a feasibility study for Ascension Island, and the rat eradication technically is feasible, but they were thinking about including mice, and that just made the project completely unfeasible. You know, so it just because of the amount of restricted airspace there is, which means sections of the island have to be done by ground, and you know, to eradicate mice you need a grid of between 10 and 20 meters per station, and yeah, you can suddenly go up to 70,000 bait stations in a small area, and that's a lot of people. So yeah, and of course the cost just skyrockets. So yeah. But like I said, there's new technology all the time, and so things are getting really, really exciting. And so some of those that we deemed unfeasible, you know, even last year or 5-10 years ago, can now suddenly change to become feasible. And that's why a lot of people repeat feasibility studies and new aspects to see if there's any changes.
I have a question, not specifically for you, is the Would there be any interest here from the Nova Scotia Bird Society and others involved in doing something like this here?
Interesting question. We actually, until a few years ago, owned quite a large number of islands and properties around Nova Scotia, but these were all transferred to the Nova Scotia Nature Trust. Hence, we don't own any properties anymore. So that might be better addressed to the Nova Scotia Nature Trust. That's not a cop-out, it's just we don't own property anymore.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I'm just battling a kitten.
And more than happy to come over and do a feasibility study for you guys. So yeah, and also teach people how to do it, because that's the other thing. We're very much about empowering the local community and the local agencies and groups there to, you know, don't get me wrong, I would like to go to every island in the world and do eradications around the globe constantly, but unless I learn to clone myself, that's probably not going to happen. But so part of our work is to upskill locals to be able to continually do this work after we go. So yeah, no, like I said, happy to do anything else.
Any other questions from anybody? Doesn't look like it. On behalf of everybody, Biz, thank you very much. A fascinating talk. Like I say, we have recorded it. As long as I don't screw anything up, in a few days' time, it will be tagged on our Facebook page group, and it'll also be sent out in a mass email to the paid society members as well, with the link on there. So really want to thank you for taking the time to chat to us. I'm just amazed by technology. We've had people from UK doing presentations, yourself, the other side of Canada, America. It's just amazing. Just get out a note from under another cat. So again, thank you very much, everybody. Really great to see folks here. Don't forget, next month's meeting is on Friday the 27th, where Dr. Tim Birkenhead from the UK will be talking about the most perfect thing, which are eggs. It's actually going to be an interview format, so quite different to anything we've done before. So that's going to be fun. And again, everybody have a great evening. Again, thank you for everybody coming by. And as long as I click everything, we should be fine. So have a good evening,
Thanks, everyone. Been great.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thanks so much, Biz.
No worries. It was a pleasure. So yeah, keep in touch. Hope to see you over there sometime.
I've been.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. New Zealand's always wanting more visitors.
Lovely place.
Wonderful. Alrighty. So hopefully come over and see your side of the world at some point too.
Come on down. It's a great place.
Yeah. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank
See ya.
you. Have a good evening, everybody.
Bye.
Right. Inspiring. Thank you.